Welcome to Influential Entrepreneurs, bringing you interviews with elite business leaders and experts, sharing tips and strategies for elevating your business to the next level. Here's your host, Mike Saunders.
Hello and welcome to this episode of Influential Entrepreneurs. This is Mike Saunders with Marketing Huddle. Today we have with us Marion McGovern, who is the founder of Thriving in the Gig Economy. Welcome to the program, Marion.
It's a pleasure, Mike.
Hey, so I love titles, and you can read so much into them. Of course, give us your background, but I'd love to start off with, I like how you chose thriving. Not just surviving the gig economy, because we're assuming that this really is a thing, a gig economy. So tell us a little bit about your background, but then what led you to this thriving in the gig economy?
I have been in the gig economy for a long time. I founded a company in 1988 which matched independent consultants with projects. So it was a gig economy company before the term was even coined.
Yeah.
And we built that and sold it to a big South African conglomerate. We had an independent contractor compliance company that went around with that. So I've been in the gig space for a long time. And it's only now that people are starting to pay more attention to it because of the dollars that are going into the big technology platforms, which are trying to bring more efficiency to the various parts of the labor markets that are involved. And there are, so many digital platforms out there, it's mind-boggling. But when I worked with my agent on what was my second book, Thriving in the Gig Economy, there was this sense that people only viewed it as, Uber drivers and people who are down on their luck. And the truth of the matter is there are many people that are doing really well as independent workers, and that was what I wanted to highlight.
Yeah, I love that. And I it's almost like somebody needs to do what Wayne Gretzky said, is skate to where the puck is going. And here's what I mean. I think so many words have a connotation that is not correct currently. So gig, people think Uber driver, Fiverr designer, things like that, small little things, but in reality, they could be massive projects. It's just freelance and flexible and virtual and things like that. So I wonder what the next word for gig will be that really connotates that authoritative expertise,
Well, and it's funny because some of the higher end of the spectrum of expertise, if you will, who are really accomplished, credentialed people that are doing these data scientific kind of projects and legal things and interim management things, they often don't self-identify as doing gig.
Yeah.
But the truth of the matter is they are self-employed. They're going from client to client. It is by definition, because a gig by definition is work of uncertain or varying duration for multiple.
Yeah, but you know what? Looking back at our economy over the last decade or so, what's certain about corporate America anyway? So that's almost a gig if you want to put that definition on it.
Quite frankly, for so many years at my company, M Squared, we were always asked to verify income for consultants for mortgages, and they would not like the fact that some of them worked as 1099s. And it's like, well, what's the guarantee that you're going to have a W-2 year to year? Yep.
Yeah, 1099. Oh, now we need 2 years of tax returns and bank statements because you're, day to day. Well, so is a W-2 employee in reality. And like you mentioned, some of those higher level executives that, might do some data mining or consulting. Well, in reality, they might have almost done like a pre-retirement, or they might be so well connected that they get a call from a buddy that goes, hey, come on down here to our firm so-and-so and do this project with us for a few months. He's like, okay, cool. And then when that's over, someone else calls him. He's like, hey, we need some. Well, he's not out there stumping for business, but they are receiving requests for their expertise. And I think they're looking at it that way, but in reality, it's freelance work.
And the truth of the matter is, Mike, I'm glad you mentioned the retirement notion. It was only last year that millennials passed boomers as the largest demographic group in the big world. I mean, people just think it's all about millennials, but it's not. Yeah. There are lots of people of all sorts. In fact, the data shows that the boomers earn more because, of course, they are those more senior individuals with experience. So, of course, they can command.
Well, have you ever, the phrase that these days called the side hustle?
Mm-hmm. We called it moonlighting back in the day, but yes.
I was just going to say, that's a cool thing now. Well, back in the day, it was moonlighting, and that was kind of like, oh, you better watch out because the boss finds. Right? Well, it was a TV, yeah, right. But like, if the boss found out, it's like, oh, you might be in trouble, even if it's not related to the business whatsoever. But now that side hustle, I have clients that I work with that I say, hey, does your boss know you're doing this and this and that? And they're like, yep. They love it. They know I'm doing it on the side. People these days don't care. Just do your job well. And that side hustle now is so much more not only well received, but so much easier to do. Because back in the day when it was moonlighting, you had to go, whatever. If you want to start a business, it was just a big old to-do. Now it's like, well, let's just fire up the laptop and I can do this, that, or the other based on my experience level. Is that kind of that barrier to entry? Have you noticed that as well?
Absolutely. And, the other aspect is, there is a big issue with the social safety net and people having access to healthcare and things like that. But the truth of the matter is, for many who are doing things like TaskRabbit or Uber driving as a side hustle, they potentially have another job to fall back on. Like, I always interview my Uber drivers, like, what do you do? Do you do this full time? Blah, 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 blah. And, I've had masseuses, teachers, lots of teachers, actually, musicians, you name it. I mean, there are lots of people who are doing this to supplement their income from other roles, and where in some cases they can get benefits. Although there was one guy that was made his living doing fantasy football, and he drove for Uber just to talk to people.
Because he's tired of being behind the screen silent. That's hilarious. Well, maybe that phrase starving artist will go away because now that starving artist doesn't have to starve because they can fill in the gaps financially with some gigs and now do what they're passionate about doing without feeling like they literally are starving.
Bingo. In fact, an economist has suggested that all of our employment data no longer is the same looking back historically, because it used to be that if you were unemployed, you didn't have a whole lot of choice for, moonlighting or side hustles, and now you do. So the valleys of what happens when you're unemployed are now not quite as deep. Yeah, that's really a great point. So what are we've kind of talked about some basics on the gig economy. What are you seeing kind of moving forward currently, before talking about moving forward, but what are some things right now that, you think about, we talked about Uber, they kind of disrupted the taxi landscape because Uber doesn't own vehicle one, and it's just this whole, connection. What are you seeing in the gig economy that could kind of mimic some of these innovative disruptions? Well, there are digital platforms for everything from senior level consulting to all sorts of technology things, but also for coaches, tutors, a company that deals with building the platforms for different marketplaces just built one for snowplow drivers. There are ones for how niche is that? Exactly. So there is, I think, this increasing trend towards specialization, some of which might not fly, but I think some of it will be much better in the niches where they are. For example, there's a company called Experfy that all they do is data scientists. And there are data scientists who built it, doing all the big data stuff. So wouldn't you rather have those guys not only qualifying the people, but also qualifying the projects? I mean, they do find themselves helping their clients more with, what is it you really need? Those kind of specialties, I think, will thrive. You also see more services toward the individuals coming from the platforms, too. When I started the research for the book 2 years ago, I joined a dozen of these things, and some of them were incredibly vanilla. And in the meantime, they've gotten more funding, and all of a sudden there are more things that are available to me as the consultant on their platform. Similarly, I became a client of a bunch of them, and again, now there are concierge services. So if I don't want to figure out who the best Google AdWords person is for me, they'll help me. Yeah. So there is an increasing level of sophistication with the idea that just putting it out there and having people figure it out might be hard. You think about like Craigslist.
Craigslist is great for what it is, but would you feel comfortable hiring your next consultant if you saw a Craigslist ad? Of course not. So some of these platforms you're mentioning that would have some semblance of vetting or social proof or portfolio of past work really does help with making that decision, and I think that's a big piece of it too, right?
Yeah, I think the challenge, and again, having run a business for almost 20 years that dealt with consultants, the challenge with the vetting dimension is you can have a great consultant do an amazing job, but then you put them in another environment where maybe they aren't given the tools they need, or their team isn't as good, or the outcomes are sort of not clearly defined that the client is looking for. So you could have a great client or a great consultant who can't do a good job in the second situation. It's kind of like reviews of restaurants on Open Table. You could have a great experience at one restaurant, but maybe your friend goes the next day and somebody's sick and, the service is awful.
Right.
So there is that dimension of I'm not totally sanguine that the sort of the Yelp for consultants works all that well.
Yeah, that's a really good point, because it's kind of like a movie. You might love a movie, and I might go, it's okay. And it just gets down to personal preference and what your expectations were. But yet, having a platform where there's something you can look at with, here's my background, here's my past experience, and here's what other people have said, at least will help point you in the right direction. Can you speak a little bit about where people, if they were interested in these platforms, like you mentioned, your background in consulting, is there a clearinghouse for, here's a platform for, anything under the sun, or consultants from not only hiring consultants, but for consultants looking for gigs?
It's funny you mention that, because I get asked that all the time, and there really isn't. There are random directories. There are services like peers.com or peers.org, PERS, and the Freelancers Union, which are wonderful resources for freelancers for everything from, where to get healthcare kind of things, to apps that might be able to help them, other services that might be able to help them. And some of those list some of the platforms, but there's no exhaustive place.
Well, I have a business idea for you.
I'm already on it. I'm already on it. Yeah.
I mean, I'm being facetious, but I'm also being serious. Whenever you find those gaps out there, and as big as the gig economy is, and from your experience, somewhere, somehow, someone should be able to come from to find this all-inclusive one-stop shop, and here's these categories, and pick from this drop-down box, and I am looking to get gigs in this realm. Where are the platforms? And you don't run the platform, you're just pointing people in that direction, and there's a lot of money to be made, but there's a lot of help that type of resource would be, because you're just the one out there pointing people in the right direction. And
it would be really invaluable too, because again, my experience of having dealt with these, there's a lot of overhead. So it's not this is not like Field of Dreams. You build it, they will come. I mean, you can't just apply to these platforms and assume they're going to be sending you stuff. You have to work it. You have to go.
Well, and then we can go down a rabbit trail for a long time on this one, but your aggregator platform that guides people to these platforms could easily be, one side of the equation would be, are you a freelancer? And then the other side, are you looking to hire a freelancer? But there could be helpful tips and trainings for both sides of that equation to go, here's some tips and tricks on hiring your next freelancer to make sure you get the right one. And here's a PDF, and here's a download, and here's a whatever, so that people go into that. Like for instance, I hired someone off of Upwork a few weeks ago, and I was kind of holding my breath, crossing my fingers, going, I hope this person's okay. And so I think there's a really big need for that, and I think that should be really fun for you. But let's get down to the next point here, because I think that anytime that there's an economy like this or an opportunity like this, that there are definitely disruptions and developments on the horizon. So from both sides of the spectrum, what are you seeing coming up in the future that people should be aware of?
The thing that I still don't know how to evaluate, quite frankly, is a lot of talk about Bitcoin being the solution for the payments. So there is actually a startup in Australia that maintains they are going to be this supplier marketplace for all the people. And in essence, they're going to disrupt the platforms. They're going to take the platforms out of the picture. And I guess, to me, payment is only one piece of it.
Yeah.
That whole algorithm of which person best matches my need to, understand whether this investment in a certain polymer is a good thing. I think you still need that sophisticated logic and the algorithms that they are building right now. So I don't really understand this Bitcoin thing. Yeah. But there are a number of people that are saying, Bitcoin is going to be.
But guess what? People didn't understand a bunch of years ago when they were on eBay. Mm-hmm. PayPal.
Yeah.
So. I'm with you. I can't even spell Bitcoin. I don't even know what the heck it is, but I know enough that I'm not going to delve into it. But I'll bet you that in 5 years from now, Bitcoin could be the PayPal. The household name of PayPal is like, of course, yeah, Bitcoin. So.
And the other aspect, which is sort of related, again, this is an Australian company, is the volume of people that are doing this globally.
Yeah.
There is a professor in Oxford who has built this system to actually take on the biggest platforms like Upwork. Upwork is one of them. Upwork, Fiverr, Guru.com, which is big internationally. I forget the other two. And he connects to them to figure out how many gigs have closed. He doesn't know the dollar number, but he knows on any given day how many people have closed a job and where the worker was from and where the client was from. And almost entirely the majority of the workers are in Asia.
Wow.
The majority of the clients are in Eastern Europe and America.
Yeah, I was going to say America probably is right on up there, yeah.
Yeah, so a lot of it's tech stuff.
Yep.
Where, you've got enormous populations of people doing tech things in Bangladesh and India and Vietnam and Thailand. But it's fascinating to look at his charts because, America isn't really in the picture.
Right.
I mean, as a
provider,
talent side, they're
as the talent side, right? Everybody, in fact, the interesting. I heard this statistic, and I know it's pretty. What you just said about you would think that Americans are, but it's always in Asia. Well, I heard that Israel is the biggest hotbed and source for new patents.
Huh.
Who would have thought? Right? Who would have thought? Because you would think that, kind of like what you said about, technology. Well, America certainly with, the Silicon Valley, but it really is interesting when you think about, kind of I don't know, just interesting facts that way. So who would have thought that someone could say goodbye to their day job, their corporate day job, and make it freelancing /gig /consulting, however you want to think of it. But what do you say to someone going, you know what, I need that side hustle, I need to get going, and okay, great, here's a few platforms you pointed me the direction to, but what about the peaks and valleys? Because there is something to be said for that steady paycheck, and as a consultant, you don't have that steadiness. So where do you advise people in that realm?
Well, there are a lot of things, quite frankly, before you jump in. One is just the isolation factor, because by definition you're going it on your own. So, you need to think back on your history and, if you ever worked from home, did you like that, or couldn't you wait to get back to the office, that kind of thing. And also how marketable are you really. The money side, quite frankly, there are cool entrepreneurs working on this side of things. There are various apps to help people manage their expenses and understand the cash flows. Financial literacy is not great in this country. Mm-hmm. So it's wonderful that some of these apps are springing up because, in essence, every freelancer is their own business person. They're running this company of one, and they really have to understand all the costs associated and as well as the revenue side. And, of course, pricing is a whole another art. But there is an interesting startup in Ireland that is developing a product to solve the biggest challenge for new, or actually for any freelancer really, which is the unpredictability of income. Mm-hmm. So they do a big data thing to figure out what is the, based on your history as a driver or a consultant or a web designer or whatever you are, what is the regular monthly take home that you can kind of guarantee. Maybe you'll go over or under that, but what's the number? And then they do different funding things so that they can sweep stuff into a savings account if you're over that month, and they can true you up, kind of give you overdraft protection, if you will, if you're under. But they don't do it for an interest rate. They just do it for the fee for the service. So it's much more cost effective. Yeah. So entrepreneurs are stepping in to loosen some of these frictions.
Yeah, I love it. Well, hey, let's wrap up with what's the best way that people can connect with you, learn more about your books, and learn more about the gig economy.
At my website, which is marionmcgovern.com, and that's Marion with an O. And there are lots of cool links and interesting articles to some of these companies that I've mentioned, in fact.
Neat. Well, Marion, it was wonderful chatting with you today, and hot topic, and I love talking about it. So thank you for your time and coming on the show.
Thanks, Mike. It was fun.
You've been listening to Influential Entrepreneurs with Mike Saunders. To learn more about the resources mentioned on today's show or listen to past episodes, visit www.influentialentrepreneursradio.com.